The alpha was dying by inches, and the whole keep had agreed to call it grief. 3 healers in fine coats came and went. Each one bowed. Each one murmured the same soft lie. Rest, sorrow, time. Not one of them ever asked about the tea. But there was a girl on her knees in the cold corridors. A girl with no wolf. No name worth speaking. The kind the world is built to look straight through. And she had a nose for what hides beneath sweetness. One gray morning, she lifted a fine cup to the light and breathed in something cold. Something mineral. Something wrong. A thing her grandmother had warned her about in a one-room cottage long ago. A poison works slowly because it wants to be mistaken for time. She had no proof, no rank, no one who would believe her. She had 3 days, and a secret she could not unknow. Part 1. In the village of Ashford, the old women had a saying. They pressed it into the hands of their granddaughters like a coin, like a warning, like something you were meant to keep close and never spend. A poison works slowly because it wants to be mistaken for time. Wren Holloway had heard those words 1,000 times before she ever understood them. Her grandmother Mabel used to say them while she hung bundles of dried moonwort from the rafters of their one-room cottage. Back when Mabel still had her sight. Back when her knees could still carry her up the forest paths to gather what the seasons offered. The old woman had been a healer of some small reputation once, a keeper of roots and remedies. And when her eyes began to cloud and the world went soft at the edges, she poured everything she knew into the only vessel she had left, her granddaughter. Wren had no wolf. She had known this since the year every other girl her age stood in a moonlit field and felt their second soul rise up inside them for the first time. They had shifted, fur and breath and something ancient unfolding beneath their skin. Wren had stood at the edge of the trees, still, small, entirely herself, no owl waiting in her throat, no second heartbeat behind her ribs, just her own hands, her own quiet. And the particular kind of silence that belongs to people the world has already decided will never amount to much. She kept a small tin of her grandmother's herbs in the pocket of her apron. It clicked faintly when she walked, a sound like a secret she carried everywhere. She was 22 when she took the lowest position in the great stone keep on the mountain, a floor maid. The kind of girl who is paid to be invisible. The keep belonged to the Alpha, Gideon Thorne, a man whose name was spoken with a weight Wren did not yet understand. The lowest maids never saw him. They scrubbed the outer halls and the servant stairs and the long gallery where the portraits of dead leaders stared down with the same cold disapproval. That was Wren's whole world. Lye soap, aching knees, the gray light of early morning, until the day everything changed. It began with a smell. The head housekeeper, a sharp woman named Mrs. Hartley, found her in the corridor one gray dawn. Hartley said surnames the way other people said curses. "You, Holloway." Wren rose from her knees. "One of the upper maids has taken ill. You will cover the antechamber rotation until she recovers." A pause. A look that suggested this was a favor Wren did not deserve. "Speak to no one above your station. Touch nothing you are not told to touch." And then she was gone. The antechamber sat one tier below the Alpha's private rooms. The other maids spoke of it in hushed voices, not because of the Alpha himself, but because of the man who guarded access to him, a household steward named Royce Vance, a man who managed the door to the most powerful person in the keep with the careful, possessive precision of someone guarding a thing he believed he owned. Wren stepped into the antechamber on her first morning with her bucket half raised, and stopped. Her nose lifted before her mind caught up, beneath the beeswax candles, beneath the warm sweetness of burning wax, something else, a faint mineral sharpness, cold, wrong, like iron heated and cooled too many times, like something alive that was slowly, quietly, becoming something else. That is not the smell of a healthy room. She did not say it out loud. She had no wolf, no rank, no right to have opinions about the air near an alpha. So she got down on her knees, and she scrubbed, and she paid attention in the way that invisible people learn to pay attention, with everything they have and nothing anyone can see. The alpha was dying by inches. Wren had not laid eyes on him, not truly, but she had pieced him together from the evidence his rooms left behind. The food trays that came back barely touched. The shallow dents in a pillow that spoke of a man who did not sleep deeply. A water glass set down too hard, the surface still trembling when she lifted it. She had watched the healers come and go, men in fine coats with leather cases. She pressed herself flat against the wall and listened, the way the unnoticed always can. Grief, one of them said. A decline of the spirit. He lost his mate after all. Rest, said another. Fresh air. Fewer obligations. Not one of them asked about the tea. The tea came every morning and every evening, on a silver tray, prepared in a private kitchen under the watchful eye of the steward's own people, carried by a single footman who never varied his path. It was Wren's job, among many small jobs, to collect the used trays. On her third morning, she lifted the breakfast tray, a small pot, a fine cup, the dark dregs of something fragrant gone cold at the bottom, and the smell hit her like a hand pressed flat against her chest. Not the tea, the residue, a gritty film at the bottom of the cup, faintly luminous, barely there. It smelled like the underside of river stones after a flood. Her hands did not shake. If her grandmother had given her nothing else, she had given her that. Steady hands. A steady heart in the moments that mattered most. Wren set the tray down on a service ledge. She looked left. She looked right. Then she pressed the tip of one finger to the residue, lifted it to her nose, and breathed. Grayvale root. Her grandmother's voice rose up in her, clear as a struck bell. Ground fine, child, so fine you cannot see it. It builds in the blood across weeks. The body believes it is only tired, then very tired, then finished. And by the time anyone thinks to look, it simply looks like time. A poison works slowly because it wants to be mistaken for time. Wren stood very still in the empty corridor. Her heart was loud now. Too loud. She cleaned the cup. She set the tray back exactly as it had been. She returned to her work as though nothing in the world had cracked open beneath her feet, but something had. That night, in the dormitory where the lower maids slept crowded together, she lay awake and counted what she had against what she lacked. She had knowledge. She had no proof, no rank, no wolf, no one in all that great stone keep who would believe a floor maid with a dead grandmother's recipes clicking in her apron pocket. But she had the tin, and she had 3 days before the next supply of tea arrived. For 2 of those days, she did the only thing she could. She watched. She pressed faint smears of residue onto scraps of parchment and hid them inside her tin. She counted the mornings and the evenings. She memorized the footman's path. She learned the shape of the wrong that was happening in this house, one quiet observation at a time. And on the 3rd night, she could not sleep at all. She rose at the dead hour, dressed in the dark without waking the others, and moved through the servant passages that ran through the keep's walls like veins through stone. She knew them better than anyone. 4 months of being invisible had taught her every turn. In her pocket, the tin, and folded inside it, wrapped in a scrap of muslin, a pinch of something small and yellow and bitter. Counterbloom, the antidote if her grandmother was right. And her grandmother was always right. Wren had planned only to leave a note, to slip it beneath the study door and let someone else decide what to do with it, to do what little she could and accept whatever came after. She had not planned for the door to already be open, not wide, a hand's width, a thin slice of firelight spilling gold across the dark stone. She stopped. The scent reached her first. Smoke, old leather, the dry whisper of maps and parchment, and beneath all of it, that same cold mineral sickness, heavier here, thicker, the smell of time running out. From behind the door came a sound, not a voice, not movement, a single careful breath that did not quite carry the quality of health. Wren Holloway, who had no wolf, who had no rank, who had been told in plain words that she had no business in this part of the keep at this hour, pushed the door open. The Alpha sat in a tall chair beside the fire, a map unrolled across his knees as though he had been trying to work and losing the fight for some time. He was younger than she had imagined. Beneath the gray of the poison, beneath the exhaustion carved into him, perhaps 30, not unkind in the face, and entirely unprepared for a maid to walk through his door in the middle of the night, carrying a small tin that clicked. He turned. His eyes were the dark gold of autumn honey, and they sharpened on her with a sudden, startling focus, a mind still clear, still fighting, somewhere beneath the fog. Good, she thought. She needed him to hear this. "You will want to have me removed," Wren said before anything else could happen. "I understand that. But please, let me say one thing first." The Alpha of the Mountain Keep said nothing. He only watched her with an expression she could not read. Not anger, not contempt. Something far more careful than either. Wren took a breath. "Someone is poisoning your tea." Part 2. He did not call the guard. That was the first thing. The thing that loosened some tight, frightened mechanism in Wren's chest. He looked at her for a long moment with those amber eyes, too sharp for a dying man. And he did not call the guard. "Your name," he said. Not quite a demand. Something more controlled than a demand. The voice of a man who had learned to keep himself level because he was always surrounded by people listening for weakness. "Wren Holloway," she answered. "Floor maid. I cover the antechamber rotation now, filling in for the one who took ill." A faint flicker crossed his face. Recognition, not dismissal. "The one who always leaves the corridor window cracked," he said. Wren blinked. He noticed that, even poisoned, even with the fog pressing in on him from every side, he noticed something as small as a window left open. She filed it away. A man who paid that kind of attention was a man who might, in the end, believe her. There was no point in being timid now. She had already walked through the door, so she crossed the room toward him, set her small tin on the arm of his chair, and opened it. She showed him the muslin packet. She told him what Greyvale root was, what it did to the blood, how it built slowly, week upon week, until the body simply gave out, and everyone around it called the loss a sorrow. She told him about her grandmother, about the years of learning, about the smell at the bottom of his cup. She told it plainly. The way Mabel had always taught her truth should be told, like bread, not poetry, nourishing before it was beautiful. He listened. His hands had gone still on the map. When she finished, the fire cracked between them, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. "The healers believe it is grief," she said quietly. "And they are not wrong that you are grieving. They are only wrong about which thing is the cause, and which is the cover." Something moved across his face then. Something old. Something sore. "My mate," he said at last. The word came out level, which meant it cost him. "Lena. She died. Some months ago." "I'm sorry," Wren said, and she meant it. Simply, without decoration. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "Brew it, the counterbloom, please." And just like that, she was no longer only a maid. She was the one keeping a secret with the alpha of the mountain. The trouble with saving a powerful man, when you are the least powerful person in his house, is that they take your voice from you long before they ever take anything else. Wren knew this. So the next morning, she did the foolish, necessary thing. She tried the proper way first. She requested a word with Mrs. Hartley. Through the right channels, with the right deference. She stood in the housekeeper's small stone office with her hands folded and her heart pounding. And she said it as plainly as she could. She had found something in the Alpha's cup, something dangerous, something that explained his decline far better than grief ever could. Mrs. Hartley listened for about 14 seconds. Then her expression hardened into something that was not quite contempt and not quite pity, something that lived in the cold country between the two. "You smelled something," the housekeeper said, flat, slow, in a teacup. "Greyvale has a very particular—" "You have no wolf, Halloway." The words landed exactly where they were aimed. And oh, how they were meant to land. Wren had heard that sentence her whole life in 100 different mouths, and it always meant the same thing. You are less. You are lacking. Whatever you think you know, you do not have the standing to know it. The healers who attend the Alpha are trained, Mrs. Hartley went on. They have served this keep for decades. And you would have me believe that a girl on her knees with a scrub brush has found what they could not. They never looked, Wren said. That's the point. They decided it was grief before they ever opened the cup. Enough. Mrs. Hartley rose from her chair, which was, in itself, a kind of dismissal. I will not have a floor maid whispering that the steward's household is poisoning the Alpha. Do you understand what you are saying? Do you understand whose name you are dragging into the dirt? Wren said nothing. Royce Vance, that was the name. The steward who guarded the Alpha's door like a man guarding something he owned. She had not said it out loud. She had been careful not to. But Mrs. Hartley had reached for it on her own, the way people reach for the powerful when they want to remind you how far you stand beneath them. You will return to your rotation. You will speak of this to no one. The housekeeper's voice dropped, and somehow that was worse. And if you persist, I will see you put out of this keep entirely. No reference, no place. You will not find work in any house on this mountain. Is that clear? Wren felt the floor of her future tilt beneath her. She had nothing, no family left but a blind old woman in a cottage at the foot of the mountain. No coin, no name that anyone respected. The little she earned here was the only thing standing between her grandmother and the cold. One word from this woman, and they would both have nowhere to go. "Yes, mistress," she said, and she went back to her brushes. That was the shape of it. That was the cost. Laid bare, speak and lose everything. Stay silent and watch a man die slowly in a chair beside a fire, while the whole house called it sorrow and looked away. She knelt in the long gallery that afternoon, brush in hand, the portraits of dead leaders staring down at her with their painted disapproval, and she let herself feel the full weight of it. For most people, this would have been the end. The math was simple. The danger was real. No one would have blamed a girl with nothing for choosing to keep her nothing. She thought about her grandmother's hands, pressing herbs into her palm. She thought about all the years of being looked through, looked past, treated like a thing that moved furniture and disappeared. And she thought that if she stayed silent now, she would become exactly what they had always told her she was. Nothing. A girl who knew and did not act. She found, kneeling there on the cold stone, that she could not unknow what she knew, and she could not become that girl. So she made a choice, not the safe one. The dormitory slept in rows, 8 to a room, the air thick with the breathing of tired women. Wren waited until the deep hour, until the breathing evened out into sleep. Then she rose. She dressed in the dark. She tucked the tin into her pocket, the counterbloom folded inside its scrap of muslin. And she moved through the servant passages like water, finding its old path through stone. 4 months of being invisible had taught her every turn, every loose board, every place the torchlight failed. The study door was cracked again, a hand's width, firelight spilling gold across the floor. He had left it open for her. That understanding did something strange to her chest, something warm and frightening at once. She was not invited the way honored guests are invited. She was invited the way a secret is kept, and there was an intimacy in that she had not expected, a trust offered in the only currency a hunted man had left. She slipped inside. He was awake, sitting in the same tall chair, though tonight the map was set aside. He turned his head as she entered, and the firelight caught the gold of his eyes, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You spoke to the housekeeper," he said. It was not a question. Wren went still. "How?" "You have the look of someone who has been threatened today." His voice was low, rough at the edges. "I have worn that look. I know it when I see it." She set her things down on the small side table and did not answer for a moment. "She told me a maid with no wolf has no business smelling poison in an alpha's cup," Wren said finally. "She told me she would put me out of the keep if I said another word." Something flickered in his eyes, a cold thing. a protective thing. And yet, he said, here you are. Here I am. Why? Ren looked at him. It was the second time he had asked her that, and she understood now that he was not asking to test her. He was asking because he truly did not understand it, because somewhere along the way, this man had stopped believing that anyone would do a hard thing for him without wanting something back. Because you are dying, she said simply, and someone in this house decided that your death should be quiet and slow and easy to look away from. And I find that I am not able to look away. He was quiet. The fire cracked. That is not a reason most people would risk their livelihood for, he said. I am not most people, Ren answered. Most people have a wolf and a name and somewhere to go. She gave a small, tired shrug. I have my grandmother's recipes and a tin that clicks. If I do not use what I know to do something that matters, then I really am nothing. And I have spent 22 years refusing to be nothing. For a long moment, Gideon Thorne said nothing at all. He only looked at her. And in his chest, something turned over that he did not have a name for. He had been surrounded his whole life by people who wanted to stand near his strength, who reached for him the way you reach toward a fire on a cold night, to take, to warm themselves, to get something. This girl had nothing to gain. She had been threatened. She had been told to be silent. And she had walked through the dark of his house anyway, carrying bitter tea and a truth no one else would speak, because a stranger's slow death offended something in her that would not be quieted. He had forgotten that kind of person existed. He had begun to believe, in the long gray months since Lena, that they did not. Ren crossed to the small side table. She had brought a clean cup from the kitchen garden stores, bypassing the tainted service entirely. She set water to warm over the low fire, and she measured the counter bloom with the steady care her grandmother had drilled into her hands. The bitter smell of it rose between them. Small, yellow, earthy. The smell of something that fights for you, quietly, from the inside. She poured the tea. She carried the cup to him and held it out. And that was when she saw his hands. The tremor. Faint, but there. The fine, helpless shake of a body being slowly unmade. He reached for the cup, and his fingers trembled against the porcelain. And for one terrible moment, it tilted, and she saw the shame move across his face like a passing shadow. This man, this alpha, brought so low that he could not hold a cup of tea without spilling it. Ren did not think. She simply reached out and steadied his hands with both of hers, her palms over his knuckles, skin against skin, and the world went very quiet. His hands were warm, warmer than she expected, and rougher too. The hands of a man who had not always sat in fine chairs by fine fires. She felt the tremor running through him, and she held it. She held him steady the way her grandmother had once held her steady, and she guided the cup gently to his mouth. He drank. His eyes never left her face, and Ren, who had spent her whole life being invisible, felt herself be seen. Not as a maid, not as a girl with no wolf, as a person whose hands had just become the only thing standing between this man and the dark. She should have let go. She knew that. The cup was empty. The moment had passed. There was no reason left for her palms to remain pressed against his knuckles. and every reason in the world for her to step back to her place. She did not step back. Not right away. For 3 slow heartbeats, neither of them moved. His thumb shifted, just slightly, just enough that the rough pad of it brushed the inside of her wrist, where the skin is thin and the pulse runs close to the surface. Wren felt her own heartbeat answer. For Gideon, the moment landed differently. It had been a long time since anyone had touched him without flinching. Longer still since anyone had touched him without wanting something. There were always hands reaching toward an alpha, hands that wanted favor, hands that wanted protection, hands that wanted the warmth of standing near power. This girl wanted nothing he could give her. He had forgotten what it felt like to be tended, not served, tended. The difference was enormous, and it ached in a place he had thought long since gone numb. He looked at her face in the firelight, the smudge of exhaustion under her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she held herself like someone braced for a blow that had not yet stopped coming. And something in him, something that had been frozen solid since the night they buried Lena, shifted half an inch toward thaw. Dangerous, that. He knew it, even as it happened. A man in his position could not afford to feel the warmth of a maid's hands over his. There were 100 reasons, every one of them sensible, every one of them true. He was grieving. He was alpha. She was a servant in his house with no standing and no protection, and whatever he let himself feel could only put her in more danger than she was already in. But he did not pull away either. Wren drew her hands back at last, slowly. The cool air rushed in where his warmth had been, and she felt the loss of it more than she wanted to. "Your hands are steadier already," she said, and her voice came out lower than she intended. "It's working. The counterbloom binds to the poison and helps the body clear it. But it's slow, a little every day, a week, maybe more, before the worst of it lifts." "Slow," he echoed. "Everything that heals is slow," she said. "Only the things that hurt you move fast." He was quiet for a moment, turning that over. "Before you go," he said, "my name is Gideon, not Sire, not Alpha." A pause. "I have not heard anyone simply say my name in longer than I can remember." Wren looked at him. "Gideon," she said carefully, testing the shape of it. Something eased in his face when she said it, as though the word were itself a small medicine. "My grandmother used to say something," she added, almost to herself, gathering her things. "A poison works slowly because it wants to be mistaken for time." "And the cure?" he asked. Wren considered him, the firelight, the gold eyes, the hands that no longer shook quite so badly, resting now in his lap. "The cure works slowly too," she said softly, "because it wants to be sure. Outside the cracked door, the keep slept on, unaware. The portraits of dead leaders kept their cold watch over empty corridors. Somewhere below, in a private kitchen, a sealed jar waited for morning, full of something fine and gray and patient. But here, in this small circle of firelight, something else had begun. Just as slowly, just as quietly, 2 people who had each been written off by the world, learning, breath by careful breath, that they had finally been seen. 3. They fell into a rhythm after that, a quiet, dangerous rhythm. By day, Wren was a floor maid. She knelt in the long gallery. She scrubbed the antechamber. She collected the silver trays and the fine cups and said nothing to anyone. Her face arranged into the careful blankness of a girl who knows her place. By night, she was something else entirely. She came through the servant passages in the dead hour. She brewed the counterbloom over the low fire, and she sat with Gideon Thorne while the keep slept. And they spoke in low voices about how to save his life. They had agreed on a plan those first few nights. Wren would keep collecting the tainted trays. She would press faint smears of the residue onto slips of parchment and hide them in her tin, building a record day by careful day. Gideon would keep accepting the poisoned tea each morning and evening so that nothing in his routine would change. And then he would pour it, quietly, into the soil of a potted evergreen that stood near his desk. Wren privately worried about that tree. She could not fix everything, and Gideon would do the hardest thing of all. He would keep appearing to decline. He would let the household believe the poison was still working. He would wear his weakness like a costume, even as the counterbloom slowly gave him back his strength. "They cannot know I am recovering," he had said. "The moment they know, they will change the method. And next time, it may be something you cannot smell." It was good thinking. Wren had agreed. But it meant something cruel, too. It meant Gideon had to walk through his own house every day, pale and slow and trembling, and watch the faces of the people around him. Watch which of them looked at his decline with sorrow, and which of them looked at it with something quieter, something like patience. That was its own kind of poison. The slow knowledge that someone close to him was waiting for him to die. Wren found the source on the fourth night. She had been working backward, the way her grandmother had taught her to trace any sickness to its root. Not the symptom, the source. The tea came from a private kitchen, a small sealed room where a quiet man named Purs prepared a special blend for the alpha each day, following written instructions he was not permitted to question. Wren had watched him for 2 evenings, the way you watch someone you suspect, and she had come to understand, slowly, that Purs was not the one. He was too careful, too frightened. He measured the leaves with the trembling exactness of a man who knew that one mistake would cost him his place, and he never once added anything that was not written down in front of him. So Wren followed the instructions instead. She slipped into the kitchen in the gray hour before dawn, when Purs had stepped out to draw water, and she found, tucked on a high shelf, a sealed jar. Plain, unmarked, except for 2 words written on a strip of paper in a neat, confident hand. Comfort Blend. Wren lifted the lid, and the smell rose up to meet her like cold water closing over her head. Grayvale, fine as dust, patient as winter, mixed into a fragrant blend of harmless leaves so that no nose, not even a wolf's, would catch it beneath the warmth of the brewing. Her hands were steady as she took a small twist of it, but her heart was not, because she knew now whose hand had written those 2 neat words. She had seen that handwriting before, on the orders pinned to the kitchen wall, on the schedules that governed the Alpha's days. The steward's hand, Royce Vance. She brought it to Gideon that night. She set the small twist of gray powder on the table between them. She told him where she had found it. She told him about the jar, and the 2 neat words, and the handwriting she recognized, and she watched the truth arrive in him, not the truth that someone was killing him. He had made his peace with that already, in the way that powerful men make peace with the knowledge that there are always knives in the dark. No, the grief that arrived in his face was a different grief. It was the grief of who? Royce, he said. The name came out of him quietly, almost gently, the way you say the name of someone you have loved. Wren said nothing. She let him have the silence. He came to me, Gideon said after a long moment. His eyes were fixed on the fire, but he was not seeing it. After Lena, when I could barely stand, when the keep needed managing, and I could not lift my head from the grief long enough to manage it. A slow breath. He offered to carry it, the accounts, the household, the 1,000 small things an alpha must hold. He said, "Let me take this weight from you until you are strong again." And you trusted him, Wren said softly. He was the only one who did not look at me like I was already gone. Gideon's jaw worked. Everyone else, they grieved Lena, and then they watched me, waiting to see if I would crack, waiting to see if the keep would need a new alpha. His voice dropped. Royce just stepped in, steadied things. And I was so grateful to have one person beside me who seemed to want nothing but my recovery. He laughed then, a short, terrible sound with no humor in it at all. He wanted my recovery least of anyone, he said. He only wanted it slow. Wren understood then the full cruelty of it. The poison was the smaller wound. The larger wound was this, that in the worst season of his life, when this man had been hollowed out by loss and could barely hold himself upright. The one hand he had reached for in the dark had been the very hand pressing the knife in. He would not want you dead all at once, she said quietly, because she would not soften the truth, even now, especially now. A sudden death raises questions, brings investigators, makes a martyr. She shook her head. He wants you diminished, weak, present enough to sign your name, absent enough not to read what you are signing. Gideon went very still. There are agreements, he said slowly. Land accords, arrangements with neighboring territories. I signed them, in the worst of it, when the fog was thickest. His hands had curled into fists on the arms of the chair. I barely remember holding the pen. I remember Royce standing at my shoulder, saying it was nothing. Routine. Already discussed. Just sign here and rest. And the revenues from those lands redirected. The word fell from him like a stone. I would have to look, but I think I already know what I would find. The fire cracked between them, and Wren did something she had not planned to do. She reached across the small space and laid her hand over his clenched fist, not to steady a trembling cup this time. The tremor was nearly gone now, the counterbloom doing its patient work. She laid her hand over his simply because he was in pain, and because no one in this great cold keep had touched this man in kindness for longer than she could imagine. His fist unclenched slowly beneath her palm. "You are not a fool for having trusted him," she said. "You were grieving. He offered shelter from the worst storm of your life. Anyone would have walked through that door." Her thumb moved gently across his knuckles. "The fault is not in the trust. The fault is in the one who saw your open hand and decided to fill it with poison." Gideon turned his head and looked at her, and in his chest The thaw she had felt those first nights spread wider, deeper, past the place where it was safe. He had been touched by healers in those gray months, examined, tended like a sick animal. He had been managed and arranged and worried over, but no one had comforted him. No one had reached across a fire and laid a warm hand over his clenched fist and told him that his grief made sense, that his trust had not been weakness, that the man he had loved like a brother had been the betrayer, and that this was Royce's shame to carry, not his. For the first time since Lena, something in Gideon Thorne stopped bracing. "You speak to me," he said slowly, "as though I am a man, not an alpha, not a symbol, not a problem to be solved." He searched her face. "Do you know how long it has been since anyone has done that?" "You speak to me as though I am a person," Wren answered, "not a maid, not a girl with no wolf." A small, tired smile. "I think we may be the only two people in this keep who can see each other clearly. Perhaps because no one has ever bothered to look at either of us until now." It was, she thought, the truest thing she had ever said out loud, because here was the strange gift hidden inside all of this danger. Wren had spent her whole life being looked through, treated as furniture, trained from girlhood to expect nothing more than to move quietly through other people's houses and disappear. And now, in the dead of night, in the firelight, the most powerful man on the mountain was looking at her as though she were the most important person he had ever met. Not because of her wolf. She had none. Not because of her name. It carried no weight. But because of what she knew, what she had done, what she had risked. For the first time in 22 years, Wren Holloway felt the full size of her own worth, and it frightened her almost as much as the poison did, because she understood, sitting there with her hand over his, that she was no longer doing this only to save a stranger. But the warmth of that night did not last. It could not. Because Royce Vance, whatever else he was not a careless man. The trouble began 2 evenings later. Wren came to collect the morning tray as she always did. The small pot, the fine cup, the dark residue waiting at the bottom for her practiced eye. But this time, something was different. There was a thread, a single fine thread of pale cotton, laid across the lid of the teapot, almost invisible. The kind of thing only someone looking for it would ever notice. Wren went cold. She knew exactly what it was. A marker, a test. Someone had laid that thread across the pot to see whether the tray was being disturbed between the kitchen and the alpha's lips, whether some hand was interfering with the careful, patient work being done in the dark. Her own hand, it seemed, had finally been noticed. She did not touch the thread. She memorized its exact position, the angle of it, the way it lay. Then she did her work as she always did, slow and blank-faced, and she set the tray back with the thread placed precisely where it had been. Her heart was pounding, but her hands, her grandmother's steady hands, did not shake at all. That night, she did not go through the usual passage. She took the longer way, the harder way, the one that doubled back twice through the dark before reaching the study, and she watched the whole time for any sign that she was being followed. When she finally slipped through the cracked door, Gideon saw her face and rose from his chair. "What happened?" "He's testing the tray," she said, a thread across the lid. He wants to know if someone is interfering. She set down her things. Gideon, he knows something is wrong. He doesn't know it's me yet, but he knows the poison isn't working the way it should. You've been declining too slowly for his patience. Gideon was quiet for a moment. The protective coldness she had glimpsed before moved across his features again. Then we change nothing, he said. If we stop now, he will know the interference came from inside the keep. He will tighten everything. He will move the poison to something you cannot catch. His jaw set. We have to let him keep believing his test came back clean. We have to be more careful, not less. I know, Ren said. I placed the thread back exactly. He'll find nothing. And if he sets a watcher? That was the question that hung between them, because they both knew that a man like Royce Vance, once his suspicion was awake, would not stop at a thread. Then I'll be careful, Ren said. I've spent my whole life being the person no one watches. I know how to move through a house without being seen. A faint, grim smile. It's the only thing being no one has ever been good for. But Gideon was not smiling. He crossed the small space between them and stopped close, closer than he ever had, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, smell the cedar and smoke and clean sweat of him beneath the fading sickness. Listen to me, he said, low, urgent. You have already done more than anyone in this keep. You found what 3 healers missed. You gave me back my own mind. His eyes searched hers in the firelight. If it becomes too dangerous, if he turns his attention to you, you stop. You walk away. You let me handle Royce myself. You can't catch him without proof, Ren said. And I'm the only one gathering it. I would rather lose him, Gideon said, than lose you. The words landed in the quiet between them and stayed there. Ren felt her breath catch. He seemed to hear what he had said only after it was already out, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, almost, that the truth had come up out of him so plainly. Neither of them moved. The fire snapped and settled. Somewhere far off in the sleeping keep, a door closed. You barely know me, Ren said softly. It was not a denial. It was a question wearing other clothes. I know that you walked into a dying man's room with nothing to gain and everything to lose, Gideon said. I know your hands are steady when the whole world is shaking. I know you tell the truth, even when a lie would be kinder. His voice dropped lower still. I have known people for 20 years that I cannot say those 3 things about. So no, I do not think I barely know you. I think I have only just begun to. Ren's heart was no longer pounding from fear. This was a different kind of racing entirely. And out there, somewhere below them in the dark of the keep, a patient man checked a thread that told him nothing and began, quietly, to plan how he would find the hand that had touched it. Part 4? The danger changed the shape of the nights. It pressed them closer. There is a particular intimacy that grows between 2 people who are keeping each other alive in the dark. It is not like ordinary closeness. It is faster and deeper and far harder to undo. When you have trusted someone with your very life, the small distances that usually take months to cross fall away in a matter of days. Ren felt it happening. She told herself it was only the danger, only the strange pressure of the secret they carried, only the fact that there was no one else in all the world either of them could speak to honestly. But she knew even as she told herself those things, that it was more. Royce Vance grew bolder. The thread had told him nothing, so he tried other tests. A grain of pale sand placed inside the cup, a drop of wax sealing the underside of the lid, small, clever traps meant to catch a careless hand in the act of meddling. Wren caught every one. She had spent her whole life learning the surfaces of other people's things, learning to leave a room exactly as she had found it, learning to be the person who was never, ever the reason anything had moved. It had been the loneliest skill in the world. Now it was keeping a man alive. But she could feel the net tightening. She could feel Royce's patience thinning, the way you feel a storm before it breaks, in the pressure behind your eyes, in the strange stillness of the air. And then he did the thing she had feared most. He increased the dose. She knew it the instant she lifted the evening tray. The residue at the bottom of the cup was thicker, darker, the cold mineral smell of it stronger than it had ever been before. He was no longer content with slow. Something had changed in his plans, some deadline she could not see. And he had decided to stop waiting, to push the alpha past the point of recovery before anyone could understand what was happening. Wren ran to the study that night, not walked, ran through the passages, her heart slamming against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Gideon was at his desk when she burst in, and he was on his feet at once, reading the fear written plain across her face. "He's increased it," she gasped. "The dose. It's nearly double tonight. Gideon, if you had truly been drinking this, a few more days at this strength, and the counter bloom would not be enough. He's trying to finish it." Gideon went very still. "Then he has a reason to hurry," he said. "Something is coming. A council, an accord. Some moment where he needs me gone, or near enough to gone that I cannot stop it." "It doesn't matter why." Wren's voice was tight. "What matters is that he is escalating, which means he is getting reckless. And reckless men make mistakes." She pressed her hands together to still them, a thing they almost never needed. But reckless men also do reckless things. "He's close, Gideon. He's so close to finding the interference. I can feel it." Gideon crossed to her. He took her hands in both of his, stilling them, and the warmth of him steadied her the way her own steadiness had once steadied him. The roles had reversed somewhere along these long nights. She had come into his rooms to hold his trembling hands. Now he held hers. "Listen to me," he said. "I want you to stop coming." "What?" "For a few nights. Just a few." His grip tightened. "Let me brew the counterbloom myself. You have taught me how. If he is closing in, the most dangerous thing in this entire keep right now is the path between your dormitory and this door. I will not have you walking it while he hunts for the hand that touched his thread." Wren stared at him. "And if you measure it wrong," she said, "if the dose is off, if you steep it too long or not long enough. Gideon, you do not have my grandmother's hands. One mistake and the poison wins." She shook her head fiercely. "I am not going to gamble your life to keep myself safe. I won't. And I am not going to gamble your life to keep myself alive," he shot back. They stood there, hands clasped, neither one giving way. And Wren understood in that moment the true shape of what lay between them. It was not gratitude. Gratitude does not argue like this. Gratitude does not plant its feet and refused to let the other person carry the risk. This was something that had grown teeth. "You don't get to do that," she said, more quietly now. "You don't get to decide that my worth is in keeping me safe and out of the way. I have spent my entire life being protected from things by being kept small, kept out, kept in my place." Her voice cracked just slightly. "You are the first person who ever let me stand in the room where it mattered. Don't take that back now. Don't make me small again just to keep me breathing." Something broke open in Gideon's face. Because he understood. Of course he understood. He had spent the same long, gray months being managed and protected and kept carefully away from the room where his own life was being decided. He knew exactly what it was to have people lift your own agency out of your hands and call it care. "All right," he said hoarsely. "All right, you keep coming." He drew in a slow breath. "But we move faster now. We get the proof we need and we end this. I will not let him get close enough to touch you." "We end it together," Ren said. "Together," he agreed. And then, neither of them let go. The fire had burned down to its low red heart. The keep was a held breath all around them. And they stood there in the small, warm dark, hands clasped between their bodies, close enough that Ren could feel the rise and fall of his chest against the backs of her fingers. The fear was still there, but underneath it, something else had risen, something that had been rising for many nights now, patient as the counterbloom, working quietly beneath the surface of everything they did and everything they did not say. Gideon lifted one hand, slowly, giving her every chance in the world to step back. He brushed his knuckles along the line of her jaw, the lightest touch, barely there, and Ren felt it move through her whole body, like warmth spreading through cold water. "I keep trying to find a reason this is wrong," he murmured. "You, here. The way I have started to listen for your step in the passage every night. The way the whole day has become only the thing I endure. Until you come." His thumb traced the edge of her cheekbone. "I am Alpha. You serve in my house. There is grief still standing in the room beside me, and danger standing in front of us both." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "I have a list of reasons as long as my arm, and not one of them makes me want to stop looking at you." Ren's breath had gone shallow. "I have a list, too," she whispered. "I am no one. I have no wolf. The whole keep would say a girl like me has no business standing this close to a man like you." Her hand had come up, somewhere along the way, to rest flat against his chest, over the steady drum of his heart. "And the only thing I want, standing here, is to be closer." For a long moment, they simply breathed together. The space between them grew smaller and smaller, by degrees too small to name, until it was almost nothing at all. She could smell him fully now. Cedar and wood smoke and the warm, clean scent of his skin. The sickness nearly gone from him entirely. She could feel the heat coming off his body. She tilted her face up toward his, and his head bent down toward hers, and the firelight gilded the edges of them both, two outlines blurring into one in the low gold light. It would have happened. It was happening. His mouth was a breath from hers. His hand cradled the back of her head, fingers sinking into her hair. Her fingers curled into the front of his shirt. The whole world had narrowed down to the small warm space where they were finally about to meet, and her eyes had begun to close, and she could feel the first ghost of his breath against her lips. And that was the moment the door slammed open. Ren had time only to wrench backward to throw a space between them before the figure filled the doorway. A guard, one of Royce's men, by the heavy set of his shoulders. He had come in fast and silent, and now he stood there taking in the whole scene with hard, calculating eyes. But it was not the guard that made Ren's blood turn to ice. It was what was in his hand. He had come from her direction, from the servant passages, and clutched in his fist, held up like a trophy, like proof, was the small tin, her grandmother's tin. She never carried it into the Alpha's rooms. That had been her rule from the very beginning. On her way in each night, she tucked it into a hollow in the passage wall, the way she hid everything that could damn her, and she gathered it again on her way out. A careful habit, built quietly over months, so that no evidence ever crossed the threshold of his door. But Royce had set a watcher on her at last, and the watcher had followed her through the dark, had marked the place her hand went to the wall, had waited for her to pass, and found the hollow, and emptied it, and then he had opened the tin, because spilling out of his other hand, catching the firelight, were the slips of parchment, the records, the pressed smears of gray residue, the careful, damning evidence she had been gathering night after night, the proof she had built so patiently in the dark, and tucked there among them, unmistakable, a fresh twist of Greyvale powder, the very twist she had taken from the sealed jar in the kitchen, the comfort blend, the proof of the poison, now sitting in the hand of the poisoner's man, inside a tin that belonged to her. "Well," the guard said softly. His eyes moved from the tin to Ren, to the Alpha standing too close behind her, his shirt still rumpled where her fingers had gripped it. The steward thought it might be one of the maids interfering with the trays. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. He'll be very interested to learn it's the no-wolf girl, the one nobody looks at twice. He weighed the tin in his palm. And that she keeps poison in her pocket. Ren's mind raced. She saw, all at once, exactly how it would look. A floor maid. No standing, no wolf. No one in all the world to speak for her. Caught in the Alpha's private rooms in the dead of night. With Greyvale powder in her own tin and slips of gray residue, she could not easily explain to anyone who did not already, somehow, trust her. It would not look like she had been gathering proof. It would look like she was the poisoner. And that was when the full, cold genius of it landed on her. Royce had not just been testing the tray. He had been laying a trap from the very beginning. And he had built it perfectly. The way a patient man builds everything, so that the moment his interference was discovered, the blame would already be wearing someone else's face. Her face, the unseen girl, the one nobody would miss, the one whose word weighed nothing against a steward's. He could not have designed a more perfect scapegoat if he had gone looking for one. Perhaps he had. "That isn't what it looks like," Ren said, and even as the words left her mouth, she heard how useless they were. "It never is," the guard said. Gideon stepped forward, and for the first time since Ren had known him, she saw the Alpha in him fully, not the grieving man, not the patient one wearing weakness like a borrowed coat, the one underneath all of that. the one the 9 territories had once followed without question. The one Royce Vance had spent long, careful months trying to dim down to nothing. "You will put that down," Gideon said. His voice was very quiet, and somehow it filled the entire room, wall to wall, floor to ceiling. The guard hesitated. Some old instinct in him, some deep and ancient wolf knowledge of who stood above whom, made his hand tremble around the tin. But only for a moment. "Forgive me, sire," the guard said, and there was real fear in his voice now, but also a hard resolve. The resolve of a man who had already chosen which master he served. "But you've been ill. Everyone says so. Not yourself, these many weeks. And here you are in the dark, with a no-wolf maid who carries poison in her apron." He swallowed hard. "The steward will want to handle this properly. For your own protection, sire." For your own protection. The same words, the same cage. The thing they always said when they were quietly taking your life out of your own 2 hands. Ren saw Gideon understand it too. Saw him calculate, in the space of a single breath, that if he fought this now, if he tried to seize the guard or roar his rank in this moment, it would only feed the story. The ill alpha, raving in the night, defending the very maid who was poisoning him. It would make Royce's lie stronger, not weaker. "It's all right," Ren heard herself say. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to feel. "Gideon." She used his name on purpose, gently. A private thing, said openly in front of a stranger, so that he would turn and look at her, so that he would see what she needed him to see. "Let him take me. Don't fight it here. Not like this." Their eyes met across the firelit room, and in that single look, they said everything they did not have the time to say out loud. She was telling him to protect the plan, to protect himself, to stay the wronged, recovering alpha in everyone's eyes, and not throw all of it away in one rash, ruinous moment for her sake. He was telling her that he would come for her, that this was not the end of anything, that he would not, could not, leave her alone in the dark. "I will not lose you," his eyes said. "I know," hers answered. "So be smart. Not brave. Smart. For both of us." The guard took her arm. His grip was hard, and the wolf strength in it reminded her, as if she had ever truly needed reminding, of exactly how alone a girl with no wolf was when the powerful finally decided to close their hand around her throat. He pulled her toward the door, and Ren, who had walked into this keep 4 months ago as no one, who had risked every single thing she had simply to be seen, let herself be led out of the warm circle of firelight and into the cold dark of the corridor, her grandmother's tin in another man's fist, a poisoner's trap drawing closed and neat around her. But here is the thing she carried with her, even then. Even pulled down a black corridor toward a locked door and a ruined name. She was not the same girl who had walked in 4 months ago. That girl would have believed she deserved it. This one knew, all the way to her bones, that she did not. The last thing she saw, before the heavy door swung shut between them, was Gideon's face. Not weak, not foggy, not declining. Awake, clear, carved with a fury so cold and so absolute that for one brief moment she almost pitied the man who had built this trap. Almost. Then the door closed, and the dark took her, and the long night of her undoing began. Part 5. They put her in a cold store room far below the keep. Stone walls, a single barred window set too high to reach, a heavy door with an iron lock, and a guard posted just outside it. Wren sat on the cold floor in the dark and did the only thing left to her. She thought. She turned the trap over in her mind the way her grandmother had taught her to turn over a sickness. Not the symptom, the source. Royce had built this so that her capture became his proof. The interfering hand had been found, the poisoner unmasked. A no-wolf maid with gray veil in her own pocket, caught creeping through the Alpha's private rooms in the dead of night. It was clean, it was simple, and it was a lie wearing the shape of the truth. The worst kind there is. She did not weep. There would be time for that later, if there was any later at all. For now she pressed her back against the cold stone and kept her grandmother's voice close, the way she always had. A poison works slowly because it wants to be mistaken for time. She had to make sure that this time the truth worked faster. And so, even there, in the dark, she began to work. The guard outside her door was bored, and a bored man talks. Talks to the guard who comes to relieve him. Talks about the steward's foul mood, about the way Vance had been pacing the upper halls half the night, about the great council that had been called for the very next evening. A council. Wren pressed her ear to the narrow gap beneath the door and gathered every single word. So that was Royce's deadline. The thing he had been racing toward when he doubled the dose. A formal council where the matters of the territory were weighed and decided, where perhaps the last of those land accords would be sealed beyond any undoing. While the Alpha sat pale and absent at the head of the table, his name worth far more than his failing will. Royce needed Gideon diminished by tomorrow night, and he needed his poisoner already caught and condemned, so that when the Alpha appeared strangely, suddenly, well, there would already be a tidy story to explain it. The maid did it. We caught her in the act. The danger has passed. Rest easy. Wren's mind worked fast in the dark. If the council was tomorrow night, then tomorrow night was when the truth had to break. Not before. Royce would be expecting a defense, a struggle, a wild accusation flung from a cell by a desperate girl. He would have smooth answers ready for every one of those. The only way to beat a man who had planned for everything was to spring the truth at the single moment he was most certain he had already won. She just had to get word to Gideon, and she had to trust that somewhere above her, he was already thinking the very same thing. He was. In the firelit study, Gideon Thorne had not slept. The fury that had carved his face when they took her had not faded. It had gone deeper instead, colder, more controlled. He had spent months pretending to be weak. He was done pretending, but he could not move yet. If he stormed down to that storeroom and freed her by force, if he threw his rank against Royce's careful story, he would only prove the steward right. The ill Alpha raving in the night, defending his own poisoner. He needed to be more than right. He needed to be undeniable. So he sent for the one man left in the keep he trusted completely, his head of guard, a grizzled, plain-spoken man named Renner, who had served these walls since before Gideon was ever Alpha. Renner, who had been chosen long ago by Lena herself. And in all the years since, Lena's judgment about a person had never once been wrong. Renner came in the dead hour and listened in silence while Gideon told him everything. The poison, the counterbloom, the girl with no wolf who had found what 3 healers in fine coats had missed entirely, the sealed jar, the 2 neat words in Royce's own hand, and the trap, sprung now, with the only person who could prove the truth locked in a cold room far below their feet. When Gideon finished, Renner's hand drifted to the hilt at his belt. "Then give me the word," he said. "I'll take 3 men I trust. We'll have Vance out of his bed within the hour. There are old ways of dealing with a man who poisons his own alpha. Quiet ways. By morning it's done, and no council ever needs to hear the girl's name at all." It would have been so easy. Gideon felt the pull of it, deep and dark and animal. The wolf in him wanted exactly that, to find Royce Vance in the dark and tear the betrayal out of him with his own 2 hands. But then, he thought of Wren. He thought of the way she told the truth. Always, even when a lie would have been kinder. He thought of how she did things, not because they were easy, but because they were right. And he knew, with sudden certainty, exactly what she would say if she were standing in this room. "No," Gideon said. "If we take him in the dark, we become him. A quiet death by night. A man removed without a hearing. That is exactly how Royce works. Poison in the dark. Death mistaken for time." His jaw tightened. He will answer for it, fully, in the light, before the council, with the proof laid bare for every set of eyes in this territory to see. Not because the law is soft, because the law is the only thing that makes us more than a pack of wolves circling a wounded man in the dark. Renner studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the old guard's hand came away from his hilt. "Lena would have liked her," he said quietly. "The girl." Something moved in Gideon's chest at that, a warmth and an ache tangled together. "Yes," he said, "I think she would have." The word came near dawn. It came through the most unlikely door of all. The lock turned softly, and Wren tensed against the wall, and the heavy door swung inward to reveal not a guard, not the steward come to gloat. Pers, the quiet man from the kitchen, the one who measured leaves with trembling, frightened hands, the one who had unknowingly brewed the poison for months on end. Following written orders, he was never permitted to question. He stood in the doorway holding a small lamp, his face gray with fear. And behind him, slumped against the wall, Wren glimpsed the shape of the guard, sleeping, a faint herbal sweetness hanging in the air. "He told me to bring you water," Perce whispered. "The steward, so no one would say you'd been left to die down here before the council." He swallowed hard. "But I heard things, in the kitchen, after they took you." His hand shook around the lamp. "The comfort blend. I always wondered what was in it, why I was never allowed to ask, why it came to me already sealed." His voice cracked clean down the middle. "It was poison, wasn't it? All this time. And I was the one who brewed it. Every cup." Wren looked at this trembling, gray-faced man, and she understood, in a single instant, the choice spread out before her. She could let him carry that guilt, could let him believe himself a murderer, broken beneath the weight of it, soft and pliable, and easy to bend. It would have been the simplest thing in the world. A frightened man is an easy man to use. Royce had proven that for months. Instead, she rose. She crossed the cold floor to him, and she laid her steady hand over his shaking one. "You didn't know," she said. "He made very sure that you couldn't know. He kept it sealed, kept it written, kept you from ever asking, precisely so that you would never see it." She held his eyes in the lamplight. "That is not your guilt to carry, Perse. It is his. Every grain of it." His breath hitched. "But you can choose what you do now," she went on, gentle and clear. "What was done to you, you did not choose. What you do next, that part is entirely yours, and no one can take that from you." Something straightened in the frightened man. A small thing, but a real one. The first piece of spine a broken creature finds again when someone finally tells him he is not the monster he feared he was. "There's a council tomorrow night," Perse whispered. "I'm to prepare the Alpha's tea for it. The strong batch. The steward handed me the jar himself this very evening." Ren went absolutely still. "You have the jar," she breathed. "The actual jar, with his words written on it." In the kitchen, sealed, his hand on the label, plain as anything. Perse nodded quickly, the lamp trembling with him. "I can take it. I can hide it away. And I can stand before the council and say what I was made to do all these months, if someone will protect me." His voice shook badly. "Will someone protect me? A man like me against a man like him?" "Yes," Ren said, without a flicker of hesitation. "The Alpha himself. I swear it on my grandmother's name." And just like that, the trap that Royce Vance had built so carefully, so patiently, over so many long months, developed its first true crack, because the steward had planned for everything, except the people he had decided did not matter. The frightened kitchen man he treated as a tool. The no-wolf maid he treated as nothing at all. The two people in the whole of the keep he was utterly certain were beneath his notice. He had built his entire scheme on a single belief, that the small and the overlooked could be used and discarded and stepped over without any consequence ever finding its way back to him. And now those very people, the unseen, the unwatched, the ones the world had written off, were quietly assembling, in the dark before dawn, the one thing that would bring him down. Word passed up through the keep that night along the thinnest of threads. Perse to a trusted undercook, the undercook to Renner, Renner to Gideon, a chain of the overlooked, the plain, the unwatched, the never noticed, carrying the truth up out of the dark, one careful hand to the next. By the time the sky began to gray toward morning, the pieces had quietly slid into place. The jar, sealed and hidden, Royce's own hand upon the label. Perse frightened to his bones, but resolved at last to speak. The slips of gray residue recovered quietly from the very guard who had seized them. A man who answered, it turned out, to Renner, and never truly to Vance. And Gideon, done pretending to be weak, ready to walk into that council the picture of a recovered, clear-eyed alpha. And let Royce Vance go on believing, right up until the final breath, that everything was unfolding exactly to his design. Down in her cold cell, Ren waited. She did not know all of it yet. She knew only that the council was that night, that Perse had the jar, and that somewhere far above her, a clear-minded alpha had stopped pretending to be a dying man. It would have to be enough. She sat against the cold stone and closed her eyes. and she thought of her grandmother's hands pressing dried herbs into her small open palm. She thought of the long, lonely years of being looked straight through. She thought of all the times the world had told her, in 100 different voices, that a girl with no wolf was a girl with no worth. Tomorrow night, the world would learn how wrong it had always been. Not with a roar, not with claws in the dark, but with a quiet, patient, undeniable truth carried up into the light by the very people everyone had decided were nobody at all. She opened her eyes in the gray light of dawn, and she found, somewhere in the long, cold night, that she was not afraid anymore. Part 6. The council gathered at nightfall, the great hall filled with the lords of the territory, the heads of the old families, the keepers of the lands, and the herds. They took their places along the long table beneath the cold gaze of the portraits, and they waited for their alpha. And when Gideon Thorne entered the hall, a quiet ran through the room like a held breath, because he did not enter as a dying man. He walked the length of that hall with his shoulders straight and his eyes clear and his stride unhurried, and the lords who had not seen him in weeks stared and murmured and recalculated. This was not the pale, fading creature they had been told to expect. This was the alpha they remembered. Royce Vance saw it too. Wren, brought up from her cell and made to stand at the side of the hall in chains, a prisoner displayed as a warning, watched the steward's face the moment Gideon walked in. She watched him do the math. He was good at math. She had to give him that. He saw the alpha's clear eyes and straight back, and something flickered behind his careful expression. Surprise, then calculation, then, swiftly, a decision. A fluctuation, he was telling himself. A good day. A temporary clarity. The poisoner is caught and in chains. The danger is past. By the next batch he will fade again, and no one will ever know. Royce Vance settled his face back into smooth concern, and Wren understood that he still believed he had won. That was exactly what they needed. Gideon took his place at the head of the table. He let his gaze travel the length of the hall, slow and unhurried, and then he spoke. "There is a matter before this council," he said, "before the lands and the accords. A matter of treachery within these very walls." His eyes moved to Wren, to the chains on her wrists. "This maid," he said, "stands accused of poisoning her alpha, caught in my private rooms, with Greyvale root in her own possession." A pause. The steward, Royce Vance, brought these charges. Let him speak them plainly, before the council, so that all may hear. It was beautifully done. He had handed Royce the floor, had invited the steward to stand and tell his careful lie out loud, in front of every lord in the territory, exactly as planned. A trap baited with the very victory Royce thought he had already secured. And Royce, of course, stood. He was smooth. He was sorrowful. He spread his hands, and he told the council a story so clean it was almost beautiful. A devoted steward, he said, who had watched his beloved alpha decline in grief and worried for his life, who had grown suspicious that something darker than sorrow was at work, who had set quiet watches and laid quiet tests, and at last uncovered the truth. A maid, a no-wolf girl, bitter and overlooked, who had crept into the alpha's rooms night after night, who carried Greyvale in a tin in her own apron, who had been caught at last with the poison and the proof of her crime in her very hands. "It grieves me beyond words," Royce said, and his voice broke at exactly the right moment, "to have found such rot growing in our own house. But I thank the spirits I found it before it was too late. Before we lost the finest alpha these lands have known." He bowed his head. The lords murmured. Some nodded. It was a good story. It hung together. It pointed cleanly at the one person in the room no one would think to defend. A girl with no wolf, no name, no standing. Wren felt the eyes of the council slide over her with contempt and pity, and she stood very still in her chains and let them. Her moment was coming. "A thorough account," Gideon said when Royce had finished. "Let us examine it, then, properly, as such grave charges deserve." He turned to the chained girl. "Wren Holloway, you have heard the accusation. What do you say?" And Wren lifted her head. She did not shout. She did not weep. She did not flail against the chains like a desperate, guilty thing, the way Royce surely expected. She simply spoke, clear, steady, in the calm, plain voice her grandmother had given her. "I say that everything the steward has told you is true," she said, "except for one word." The hall stilled. "I did creep into the Alpha's rooms night after night. I do carry grave ale. I was caught with the poison and the proof both." She let that hang. All true. Every part, except for the one word that matters most. Her eyes found Royce's. "I am not the poisoner. This is the desperate—" "You did not let me finish," Wren said, and something in her quiet voice cut through his, and the council, curious now, turned back to her. "I carry grave ale," she said, "because I gathered it as proof from a sealed jar in the private kitchen, a jar labeled in a neat and confident hand with 2 words, Comfort Blend, the very blend brewed into the Alpha's tea each morning and each evening." She did not look away from Royce. "I crept through the Alpha's rooms at night because by day no one would believe a no-wolf maid who smelled poison in a cup. I tried the proper channels first. I was told to be silent or be cast out. So I gathered my proof in the only hours that were mine." She turned back to the council. "I learned the smell of grave ale at my grandmother's knee," she said. "She was a healer. She taught me what 3 of your trained physicians could not see, that the Alpha was not declining from grief. He was being poisoned, slowly, patiently, by someone who wanted him diminished, not dead, present enough to sign his name, absent enough not to read what he was signing." A ripple moved down the long table. The land accords. Several of the lords shifted. Several of them, Wren saw, began their own quiet arithmetic. Royce moved fast. "This is exactly the cunning I warned you of," he said, his voice rising now, the smoothness thinning at the edges. "A clever lie from a clever, dangerous girl. She has clearly studied poisons, by her own admission. She accuses me to save herself. Where is this jar? Where is this proof? Words. Only words. The word of a no-wolf made in chains, against the word of your steward." It was a good throw. It almost landed, because the lords looked, and they saw a chained girl with no standing, and a trusted steward in fine robes. And the old habit of the powerful is to believe the powerful. But Gideon had been waiting for exactly this. "You are right, steward," he said mildly. "Words alone should not condemn a man. Not you, not her. So let us have more than words. He raised one hand. Bring it in. The side door opened, and Renner entered with Purs walking pale beside him, and in Purs's trembling hands, a sealed jar. Royce Vance went very still. This man, Gideon said, prepared the Alpha's tea for many months. Following written orders he was forbidden to question. He did not know what he brewed. He knows now. His voice hardened. Purs, tell the council what you brought. Purs swallowed. His hand shook. But his voice, when it came, did not. The comfort blend, sire. The jar the steward handed me himself this very evening for tonight's council tea. He held it up for all to see. Sealed, with his hand on the label. I never opened it. I never knew. But I kept it. Whole. Just as he gave it to me. The hall had gone deathly quiet. Gideon turned to his council. 3 of you keep healers of your own. Let them come forward. Let them open this jar in front of all of us and tell this hall what is mixed into the Alpha's comfort. And here was the moment. The healers came forward. Cautious. Important. 3 trained men with decades between them, the very kind who had stood at Gideon's bedside and called it grief. They broke the seal. They opened the jar. They lowered their fine noses to the fragrant blend within, and they smelled tea. Warm, pleasant, harmless. One of them straightened, frowning, almost relieved. Sire, he began, I detect nothing but... Of course you don't, Wren said. Every head in the hall turned. That is the whole genius of it, she said quietly. Greyvale, ground fine enough, blended with the right fragrant leaves, cannot be caught by a wolf's nose. Your sense of smell is too strong. It drowns in the warmth of the blend. The brighter your nose, the more certain you are that the cup is clean. A breath. That is why he chose it. That is why 3 trained healers stood at this Alpha's bedside for months and smelled only sorrow, because Greyvale was made to fool exactly the kind of nose you are all so proud of. She lifted her chained hands, as much as the irons would allow. I have no wolf, she said. I have never had a wolf. The whole of this keep has spent my whole life reminding me of it. But the human nose does not work the way yours does. It does not drown. It catches the cold mineral note beneath the sweetness. The thing your wolves are built to miss. She met the eyes of the frowning healer. Bring it to me. Unchain one hand. Let the girl with no wolf show you what your wolves cannot find. There was a long, taut silence. Then Gideon nodded once. Do it. A guard unlocked one of her wrists. The jar was carried to her, and Wren, in her chains, in front of the assembled lords of the territory, lowered her face to the blend, and breathed, and found it at once. Beneath the bergamot and the dried bloom, she said, a cold note, like wet stone, like the underside of a river rock. She looked up. Greyvale, ground to dust, hidden in the warmth. Have your healers grind a fresh sample and steep it slow. Test the residue against the slips I gathered. It will match. It will all match. The cup, the jar, the records, every grain of it pointing back to one hand. She set the jar down. And the hand, she said softly, is on the label. It came apart for Royce Vance very quickly after that. The way these things do, once the first true crack appears in a thing that was only ever held together by everyone agreeing not to look too closely. The healers ground the sample, they steeped it, and the cold mineral truth rose up out of the cup in front of the entire council, unmistakable now that they knew to look for it, plain even to noses that had been built to miss it. The slips matched, the jar matched, and the two neat words on the label in that confident, familiar hand matched the orders pinned in the kitchen, matched the schedules that governed the Alpha's days, matched the script on a dozen documents that Royce Vance himself had signed. He tried, even then. He was a man who had planned for everything, and such men do not stop planning even as the floor opens beneath them. He spread his hands. He summoned outrage. He spoke of forgery, of conspiracy, of a clever maid and a deceived Alpha. But the room had turned. Wren watched it turn, watched the lords look at the chained girl who had smelled what their healers could not, and then at the smooth man in fine robes who had stood at their Alpha's shoulder and smiled while poisoning him by inches. Watched them see at last what had been in front of them all along. Enough, Gideon said, and it was enough. His voice filled the hall the way it had filled the study that night, and Royce Vance fell silent at last. Gideon rose. He came down the length of the table, slow and unhurried, until he stood before the man who had hollowed him out in his grief. And when he spoke, his voice was terribly quiet and terribly level. "You came to me when I could not stand," he said. "You offered to carry my burdens until I was strong again. And every cup you handed me was meant to make certain that day never came." His jaw worked. "I trusted you, Royce. In the worst season of my life, I reached for you in the dark, and you filled my open hand with poison." Royce said nothing now. There was nothing left to say. "There are old ways I might answer this," Gideon went on. "Quiet ways. By night. The wolf in me wanted them. Badly." His eyes flicked just once toward Wren. "But I will not become the thing you are. You will not die quietly in the dark, mistaken for time. You will stand before this council in the full light, and you will answer for every grain of it. The poison, the accords, the revenues you redirected while I could not read my own name." He stepped back. "That," he said, "is more courtesy than you ever showed me. Take him." Renner moved, and his men moved with him, and they closed around Royce Vance on every side. There was no chase, no struggle worth the name. Just a smooth, careful man led from a hall he had thought to rule from the shadows, while the lords he had hoped to fool watched him go in silence. And Wren stood in her single remaining chain, her wrist still aching from the iron, the jar at her feet, and understood that it was over, not with claws, not with a roar, but with a cold note beneath sweetness, caught by a nose that had no wolf behind it, with a truth gathered patiently in the dark and carried at last into the light. Gideon turned to her, in front of the entire council, in front of every lord and every portrait and every set of eyes that had ever looked through her. And he reached out, and he took the iron from her wrist with his own hands. "This one is no prisoner," he said to the whole hall, his voice ringing clear. "This is the woman who saved your Alpha's life when 3 healers could not, when a steward schemed, when no one in this keep would so much as listen to a girl they had decided was no one." His eyes held hers, and there was something in them that made her breath catch even there, even then. "Remember her face, every one of you. You looked through her for 4 months." A pause. You will not make that mistake again. Part 7. The keep reorganized itself in the days that followed. Royce Vance's web was combed through, thread by careful thread. Others fell with him. The ones who had known and looked away. The ones who had carried his orders up and down the halls and asked no questions, because asking questions had never been good for a person near the steward. The land accords were suspended, every one of them, pending a slow and honest review. The redirected revenues were traced, coin by coin, back to where they belonged. One of the 3 healers came to find Wren in the quiet days after, the one who had broken the seal on the jar in front of the whole council. He did not make excuses. He stood in front of a girl with no wolf, this trained man with his decades of learning behind him, and he said simply that he had been wrong, that he had decided what was wrong with his alpha long before he ever opened the cup, that he had let his certainty do his looking for him, and that he would not make that mistake again as long as he lived. Wren accepted it. Her grandmother had taught her that too, that a person who can stand in the open and say I was blind has already taken the first step back toward seeing. You do not punish that. You make room for it. But here is the thing Wren truly expected in those still days after. She expected to be sent back. The emergency was past. The poisoner was caught. The alpha was well, walking the halls with color in his face and steel back in his spine. And in all her experience of the world, that was simply how things went. The crisis ends. The small people who rose to meet it are quietly returned to their small places, and the whole affair becomes a story that gets told for a season, and then less, and then not at all. She expected to go back to her brushes, her lye soap, her aching knees, the long gallery and the painted dead leaders staring down at her with their old, cold disapproval. She had made her peace with it, almost, because she was not the girl who had first knelt on that cold stone floor 4 months before. That girl had believed, somewhere deep down, the thing the world kept telling her. This one did not. This one knew, all the way to the marrow of her, exactly what she was worth. And no one would ever take that knowing from her again. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that simply had to be enough. She was therefore not at all prepared to be summoned. Not to the study, not to the warm and secret dark of the firelit room where all of it had begun. To the formal hall, the great pale room of high windows and cold columns of light, the room where things were made true and binding and lasting. The room a girl like her had never once set foot inside in all her months beneath that roof. She walked the length of it in her plain dress, her heart going hard against her ribs. Gideon stood near the central window. Renner waited at a respectful distance, and Mrs. Hartley stood near the door, looking for all the world like a woman caught in the middle of revising a great many long-held opinions at once, and not enjoying the work of it. Wren stopped in the center of the room. The small tin was back in her pocket, returned to her with the rest of her things. It clicked faintly as she came to a halt, that old familiar sound, the sound of a secret she had carried her whole life long. Renner has recommended a formal commendation, Gideon said. His voice was careful, not cold. Careful. The voice of a man choosing words he knew full well would be remembered. The council has been told of your part in all of this, the full part, not the version that keeps a powerful man comfortable, the true one. He held her eyes. there is a recognition available to you. A standing. A name set down in the records of this keep that will outlast every soul in this room. He paused. But that is not why I called you here. Ren waited. There is a position, he said, that does not currently exist anywhere in this household. I am creating it. Tonight. He took a slow breath. Someone in this keep must oversee the safety of everything that passes the lips of those who live in it. The food, the medicine, the drink, the preparation of all of it, from the first storeroom to the final cup. His voice was level and certain. Someone who knows what poison smells like when it is wearing the mask of ordinary things. Someone who thinks to look in the places the trained and the certain never think to look. He let that hang in the cold, pale light. It would be yours, he said, if you want it. Ren stood very still, and she understood, in that long, quiet moment, exactly what this was, and more importantly, what it was not. It was not a reward handed down out of guilt. It was not a debt being settled so that a powerful man could be free of the weight of owing something to a maid. She had seen men do that before. Give a gift to clear their own conscience, and the gift always carried a faint smell beneath it, the smell of wanting, very politely, to be rid of you. This was not that. He had sat with the real question, what does this keep actually need? And he had followed it all the way to an honest answer, and the answer was her. Not as thanks, as truth. That distinction mattered to her more than she had words for. I have no wolf, she said. Not an objection, an honest accounting of what she was and what she was not. The same words she had carried like a stone her whole life, set plainly on the table one more time, so that no one could say later that she had hidden it. I know, Gideon said, no hesitation at all. You have something I have found, this past while, far more useful than any wolf in my household. The corner of his mouth softened. You have eyes that look first. And judge never. There is no second soul on this mountain I would trade for that. Behind her, Mrs. Hartley made a small, strangled sound. Ren very nearly smiled. I would need to learn more, she said instead, because she would not pretend to be larger than she was. Not even now. Not even here, in the room where things were made true. There are things my grandmother taught me, and things she did not live long enough to teach, gaps in what I know. I would want access to the keep's libraries, to the old apothecary stores. I would want to fill those gaps properly, not guess at them. Granted, Gideon said, and I would want to visit my grandmother's cottage. She paused. There are records there. Her notebooks, a lifetime of them, in her own hand. She was thorough, beyond anything you would believe of a blind old woman in one small room. Her voice steadied. They should not be left to rot at the foot of a mountain when they could be saving lives at the top of it. Something shifted in Gideon's face at that. Something that had been held very carefully at a formal professional distance for the whole length of this conversation, slipped, just slightly, into warmth. When you have settled in, he said, we will go together. Ren caught the word as it landed. So did he, she thought. Neither of them looked away from it. Neither of them pretended it had not been said. Then yes, she said quietly. I accept. And Gideon Thorne, alpha of the territory, let the warmth he had been holding so carefully in check rise all the way up into his eyes. Good, he said. Renner looked very deliberately at the ceiling. Mrs. Hartley looked very deliberately at the floor. And the cold, pale light came down through the high windows in long, clean columns. And something that had spent so very long dying within these stone walls was now, very plainly and very quietly, beginning again. The seasons turned, and the keep changed around the girl with no wolf, not all at once. Change like that never comes all at once. It comes the way healing comes, the way trust comes, the way every lasting thing in this world comes, slowly, a little at a time. So slowly you do not notice it happening at all. Until one morning you look up and find the whole world has quietly become a different shape than it was. The maids who had once looked straight through Wren now stepped aside when she passed in the halls, and not from fear, from something closer to respect, and stranger than respect. Word had traveled through the lower corridors the way word always does. The floor maid who had saved the Alpha when the great healers could not, who had stood in chains before the entire council, who had taken the trap set for her and turned it with nothing but a steady voice and a careful nose back upon the one who set it. The young girls who scrubbed the outer halls watched her go by with wide and wondering eyes. A no-wolf girl, like some of them were, carrying herself now like someone who mattered, because she did. And that, Wren came to think, might be the truest thing to grow out of all of it. Not her own changed place in the household, but those small girls on their knees in the cold corridors, who now knew, because they had seen it with their own eyes, that a girl born without a second soul could still grow up to be someone an entire keep could not do without. That the world's first measure of a person was never the final one. That to be overlooked was not the same thing as to be worthless. It only meant that no one with the right kind of eyes had yet bothered to stop and look. She built the new role with the same patience she had once built her case in the dark. She walked the kitchens until she knew every corner of them. She learned the suppliers, the stores, the deliveries, the 1,000 small doors through which something harmful might one day try to slip in unseen. She trained Purrs, who had found his spine in a cold cell and never quite misplaced it again, to be her second pair of careful hands. She set apprentices to studying the old knowledge, the smells, the signs, the quiet things that hide in plain and ordinary sight. And in the libraries and the apothecary stores, slowly, she filled in the gaps her grandmother had left behind. She was good at it. Of course she was good at it. She had been training for this her whole life, without ever once knowing it. All those years of being invisible had taught her, better than any teacher could, how to see the things that others walked right past. All those years of being looked through had taught her to look hard at everything in return. The loneliest skills she owned, the ones that had cost her so much quiet pain, had turned out, in the end, to be the most valuable skills in the keep. And in the evenings, there was Gideon. It grew slowly, the way they had both promised it would, without ever quite saying the promise aloud. Nothing rushed, nothing seized or grasped at. A great deal of plain honesty between them, which was its own kind of intimacy. Perhaps the deepest kind there is. Long evenings in the study with the fire burning low and her grandmother's notebooks spread open across his old map table. The two of them bent over the pages, arguing pleasantly about protocols and precedent and the right way to guard a household. The quiet, steady electricity of being truly known all the way down to the bottom of yourself by someone who had looked and chosen to stay looking. There were no more cracked doors in the dark now. There was no need for them. She came through the front of the study openly, a woman with a name and a place and every right in the world to be there. And if some of the older lords carried opinions about an alpha and the no-wolf woman he could not seem to keep his eyes from, well, the lords could keep their opinions. Gideon had very nearly lost his life to the careful, comfortable judgments of careful, comfortable people. He had no patience left for any of it. He had learned in the worst and darkest season of his whole life precisely what was worth having in this world, and precisely what was worth nothing at all. He had learned what mattered, and he wore it plainly now. The way a man wears a thing he is finally done pretending away. When the announcement at last came, it surprised no one in that keep who had eyes in their head. The court had its opinions, naturally. The court could keep those too. The cottage at the foot of the mountain was smaller than Wren remembered it. This was not the cottage's fault. She had grown, not taller, wider, in some quieter dimension that no measuring stick could ever catch. And the small rooms that had once held the whole of her childhood now felt like old garments she had outgrown without ever noticing the growing happen. She stood in her grandmother's workroom. It still smelled of dried moonwort and silver ash, even after all this time apart. The bundles still hung from the rafters where Mabel had tied them, gone brittle and pale now, but holding their faint green ghosts of scent. The light still came slanting through the one small window the way it always had, falling soft and gold across a whole lifetime of patiently gathered knowledge. She lifted one of the leather-bound notebooks down from its shelf. The pages were soft with handling, dense with her grandmother's small, careful hand. She had been working through them steadily for some time now, transcribing, organizing, carrying them up the mountain one armful at a time. Copies of all of it lived in the keep's new library now, and apprentices bent over them each day, learning what Mabel had spent a long lifetime learning in this one small room. A blind old woman in a one-room cottage, who had poured everything she knew into the narrow vessel of her granddaughter's memory, because that vessel was the only one she had left to fill. And look now what that filling had become. "You're going to stand there holding that notebook all morning," came a warm voice from the doorway. "Or are you going to show me the rest of it?" Wren looked up. Gideon stood in the low doorway, having to stoop a little to fit himself beneath the old frame. The seasons of counterbloom and honest sleep and brisk mountain air had restored him fully, more than restored him. There was a quality to him now that she had come to know well and to love. The particular clarity of a man who had very nearly been taken from himself in the dark, and had learned, in the losing and the finding both, exactly what he valued and exactly why. He no longer weighed a person by the second soul standing behind their eyes, only by what they were willing to do when it cost them something. And that, he had decided, he would carry with him for the rest of his life. This was hers, Wren said. Her workroom. The notebooks are all here. I want to bring the last of them home with us. We'll take whatever you need. He stepped inside, ducking the herbs, and looked slowly around at the cluttered shelves and the hanging bundles and the soft fall of gold light. She was remarkable. Your grandmother. You can feel it in here. A whole life spent learning how to keep other people alive. She would have liked you, Ren said, then considered it more honestly. Eventually, she would have made you drink 3 different diagnostic teas first and watched you very closely the whole time you did it. I would have submitted to that, Gideon said, with great gravity. Fully, and without a single word of complaint. Ren laughed, and it still did something specific and immediate to his whole expression. Every single time. A thing that had not faded across all the turning seasons. A thing she had begun to suspect never would. He crossed the small room to her, and he took her hand in both of his. Those hands that no longer trembled at all now, that had steadied themselves slowly over long seasons of patient mending. He turned her hand over in his, and he pressed his lips to her open palm the way he sometimes did, a small and private thing, a quiet ratification of something long since settled and agreed between them. The same palm she had once laid over his shaking hands in the firelight to steady a cup of bitter tea against his mouth, the hand that had reached down into the dark for him and pulled him back into the light. Ren reached into her coat pocket with her other hand and closed her fingers around the tin. It was warm. Warm from being carried so long against her body. She drew it out and held it for a moment in the gold light. This small, dented thing that had clicked faithfully at her side through every single chapter of her life. She thought of Mabel, pressing dried herbs into her small girl's palm. She thought of standing in the antechamber with a cold cup in her hands and a smell she could not, however she tried, unknow. She thought of a study door cracked open in the dark, a low and dying fire, a man who was still fighting somewhere far beneath the fog. She set the tin down on her grandmother's work table, not abandoning it, only setting it for a moment back in its rightful place, in the room where it had first been filled, on the worn old wood beneath the hanging silver ash, right where it had all begun. A poison works slowly, she said softly, because it wants to be mistaken for time. Gideon stood quietly, watching her, letting her have the moment whole. My grandmother told me that more times than I could ever count, Ren said. It was meant as a warning, a thing to keep me careful and watchful and alive. And it was true. Every word of it true. She traced one finger slowly along the dented lid of the tin. But she only ever told me the first half of it. And the second half? He asked. Ren looked up at him, the gold light, the herbs swaying gently overhead. The man who had learned, somewhere along the way, to look at a person before he judged them. Because a girl with no wolf had taught him how, without ever once setting out to. The second half is this, she said. A poison works slowly because it wants to be mistaken for time, but so does an antidote. So does trust. So does a person's worth, growing quietly inside someone the whole wide world had already decided was nothing. A breath. And so does love, built one honest evening at a time, between two people who were both written off, and both learned to pay attention, and found in each other, at long last, the particular relief of being seen by someone who looks first and judges never. The small hearth crackled. The brittle herbs swayed faintly on their old strings. The slow things, Ren said, are the ones that last. The fast things only ever wound you. Everything that truly heals takes its time about it. Her voice went quiet. She taught me that. She simply never lived long enough to see for herself how right she was. Gideon lifted her hand once more and held it against his chest. Over the steady, strong, unpoisoned drum of his heart. She lives in every notebook on that shelf, he said quietly. And in every life, those notebooks will go on to save. And in you, most of all. He paused. She poured herself into the only vessel she had left to her. And that vessel turned out to be the strongest thing on this entire mountain. Wren's eyes stung. She let them. She picked up the last of the notebooks and tucked them carefully under her arm. And then she reached, again, for the tin. She was not ready to leave it behind. And she decided, standing there in the gold light, that this was perfectly all right. That some things you carry not because you still need them, but because they are the small, steady weight that tells you who you are on the days you have forgotten. The particular sound you make moving through the world. She slid it back into her pocket. It clicked, exactly the way it always had. Ready? Gideon asked. Wren looked one last time around the small gold room, the hanging herbs, the crowded shelves, the soft light falling across a blind old woman's whole lifetime of gathered knowledge, carried now, armful by armful, up the mountain and into the light, where it would go on quietly saving lives long after everyone who had ever known Mabel's name was gone from the world. A no-wolf girl, who grew up to become the one woman an entire keep could not do without, who learned, in the hardest way there is, that the world's first measure of a person is never the final one, that to be overlooked is not and never was to be without worth. It only ever meant that the right eyes had not yet found you. Ready, she said, and they stepped together out of the small cottage and into the wide, unhurried morning, carrying what mattered, leaving behind nothing that needed keeping. The tin clicked softly at her side, in time with her steps. A secret once. A weight she carried now, not out of any need, but out of love.